Mr. Tillerson, when we met on Monday night, and thank you for coming by, I provided you a copy of a bill that was filed in the last Congress, which I anticipate has or will be filed again in this new Congress here in the Senate by my colleagues, Senator Flake and Senator Leahy. What it would do is it would remove the travel ban to Cuba by Americans. If you are confirmed and that bill were to pass the Congress, would you advise, can you commit that you would advise the President to veto that bill?
Senator, as to the current status of travel to Cuba, that is going to be under discussion with the President-elect. I think he's been fairly clear on his intent that he is going to ask all agencies, essentially on day one, to do a complete review of recent executive orders and the change of the status of travel to Cuba as well as business activities in Cuba. So it would be my expectation that the President would not immediately approve that bill until after that review had occurred, because that would be part of a broader view of our posture towards Cuba.
Well, again, if he doesn't act on the bill, it would become law without a signature. So my question is, at this time, you cannot commit to supporting a veto of that bill should it pass.
Well, I would support a veto because I don't think we want to change the current status of things until we've completed that review.
That was the question I wanted to get to. Let me ask you this: if a bill were to pass Congress that would remove the U.S. embargo against Cuba, and there hasn't been democratic changes on the island of Cuba, would you advise the President to veto a bill that lifted the embargo on Cuba?
If confirmed, yes, I would.
And can you also commit that you would advise the President to reverse many, if not all, of the Obama administration's Cuba regulations and executive orders regarding Cuba that were recently submitted in 2014?
As indicated, I expect a comprehensive review of all those executive orders, and from the State Department perspective, would want to examine carefully the criteria under which Cuba was delisted from the list of terrorist nations that support terrorism, and whether or not that delisting was appropriate and whether or not the circumstances which led to that delisting still exist.
You do not currently have an opinion at this time as to whether Cuba belongs on the list of terror sponsors?
Well, I would need to examine all the criteria that were used to make the current determination, and then utilizing the expertise of those in the State Department, again informed by the interagency process, to look at those criteria that would put Cuba back on that list.
As I'm sure you're aware, there is a dispute between China and Japan over control of the Senkaku island chain. If China attempted to take over the island chain through the use of military force, would you support the United States responding with military force to prevent that from happening? Well,
we have long-standing ally commitments with Japan and South Korea in the area, and I think we would respond in accordance with those accords, which are not a NATO-type agreement, but certainly we have made commitments to Japan in terms of a guarantee of their defense.
I want to, because in your opening remarks you referred to human rights, and I'm glad that you did, and I wanted to walk you through a few examples quickly. I shared with you when we met on Monday a political prisoner database maintained by the Congressional Executive Commission on China. It contains more than 1,400 active records of individuals known or believed to be in detention. Do you believe China is one of the world's worst human rights violators?
China has serious human rights violations relative to categorizing it against other nations. I would have to have more information, but they certainly have serious human rights violations.
Okay. Well, since President Rodrigo Duterte took office last June, the Los Angeles Times reports that roughly over 6,200 people have been killed in the Philippines by police and vigilantes in alleged drug raids. In your view, is this the right way to conduct an anti-drug campaign?
Senator, the U.S., America, and the people of the Philippines have a long-standing friendship, and I think it's important that we keep that in perspective in engaging with the government of the Philippines, that long-standing friendship, and they have been an ally, and we need to ensure that they stay an ally.
That's correct, Mr. Tillerson, but my question is about the 6,200 people that have been killed in these alleged drug raids. Do you believe that that is an appropriate way to conduct that operation, or do you believe that it is something that's conducive to human rights violations that we should be concerned about and condemning?
Senator, confirmed. Again, it's an area that I'd want to understand in greater detail in terms of the facts on the ground. I'm not disputing anything you're saying because I know you have access to information that I do not have.
This from the Los Angeles Times.
Well, again, I'm not going to rely on solely what I read in the newspapers. I will go to the facts on the ground. I'm sure there's good, credible information available through our various government agencies.
Well, one of the sources for that number in the campaign and its nature is President Duterte himself, who openly brags about the people that are being shot and killed in the streets, who he has determined are drug dealers without any trial. So if in fact he continues to brag about it, would that be reliable information that you would look at and say, okay, it's happening? What's happening in the Philippines is not an intelligence issue. It is openly reported in multiple press accounts. The President-elect has spoken about it, and quite frankly, the President of the Philippines has admitted to it, in fact, brags about it. So I guess my question is that, in your opinion, an appropriate way for him to act, and should it influence our relationship with the Philippines?
If the facts are in fact supportive of those numbers and those actions, then I don't think any of us would accept that as a proper way to deal with offenders, no matter how egregious the offenders may be.
I'm sure you're also aware of the lack of both religious freedoms and the rights and lack of rights of women in Saudi Arabia. In your opinion, is Saudi Arabia a human rights violator?
Saudi Arabia certainly does not share the same values of America. However, American interests have been advocating in Saudi Arabia for some time. And I think the question is, what is the pace of progress that should be expected for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to advance rights to women and others in the country?
But as it currently stands, do you consider what they're doing to be human rights violations?
I would need to have greater information, Senator, in order to make a true determination of that.
You're not familiar with the state of affairs for people in Saudi Arabia, what life is like for women? They can't drive. We've had people jailed and lashed. You are familiar with all of that?
Yes, Senator, I'm familiar with all of that. And
so what more information would you need?
In terms of when you designate someone or label someone, the question is that the most effective way to have progress continue to be made in Saudi Arabia or any other country? So my interest is the same as yours. Our interests are not different, Senator, and there seems to be some misunderstanding that somehow I see the world through a different lens, and I do not. I share all the same values that you share and want the same things for people the world over in terms of freedom. But I'm also clear-eyed and realistic about dealing in cultures. These are centuries-long cultures, cultural differences. It doesn't mean that we can't affect them and affect them to change. And in fact, over the many, many years that I've been traveling to the kingdom, while the pace has been slower than any of us wish, there is a change underway in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. How and if they ever arrive to the same value system we have, I can't predict that. But what I do believe is it is moving in the direction that we want it to move. And what I wouldn't want to do is to take some kind of a precipitous action that suddenly causes the leadership in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to have to interrupt that. I'd like for them to continue to make that progress.